Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a good morning, day, evening, afternoon, night, depending on where you are. Welcome to Lord Pog Gaming, and I'm your host, Lord Pog. I'm going to do a gaming rant video, which usually come a little bit off the top of my head. I don't script them and use as much bullet points and jump between the two nearly as much. I just kind of go off the cuff with these things. I've done a few in the past, and you can find them under the Gaming Rant playlist on the channel. So if you like what I do here, please leave a like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment in my guest book being my clever terminology for my comment section. And join the Patreon if you want to help support the channel. Time and money is what's kind of holding me back on a lot of things with this channel, and so if I could get enough support, I might be able to do this full time. I don't know. It would be nice, but I don't know. I guess we'll have to see. But with all that out of the way, I want to get into the rant of this whole thing and talk about some of this gaming news. See, I've started a podcast with my brothers, Android and Crazy, called Stick Drift, which you can also find on the channel under the Stick Drift playlist. It's a slow moving process. It's slow going, but I hope it'll catch on. Topics we usually talk about is gaming and just pop culture in general, and on there I'm known for being pretty passionate about my views on gaming culture and just what's going on in pop culture in general. It is being taken over by a lot of indoctrinated people, I guess you could say. And one of the things that came to my attention in gaming news here recently is the controversy between Highguard and Tencent. I was first turned on to this by Clownfish TV. I just happened to see a thumbnail for it and decided I'd take a look. The issue here is that Highguard was promoting itself as like an indie developed game. Games that I typically like to play myself. And kind of looked at Highguard at the when I saw its preview at the Game Awards here recently. And I just really wasn't impressed. I'm not even gonna lie. I just really wasn't impressed. I wasn't impressed with a lot of the games that they featured at the Game Awards, if I'm being honest. They're just not that interesting. And it was weird to me how they tried to promote a lot of indie style looking games in the first place. Game Awards have always been known for the AAA studios to showcase their best, what is up and coming, and what they're trying to hit you hard with, while sort of hitting a type of niche, I guess. This year, it didn't come across nearly as much. I guess I shouldn't say this year, the 2025 Game Awards. It didn't come across nearly as like that. It came across as they were trying to showcase more indie games than they were AAA games, or indie games that are backed by AAA games and this and that and whatever. You know, a few of them looked really good, like Larian Studios' Divinity, the new Divinity game coming out. You know, that's a pretty big deal. You know, that's not an indie game. With that said, though, all of a sudden you get Highguard, who gets this like coveted spot at the Game Awards, and people were a little confused by it. Jeff Keighley was known for going on and leaving a post on X talking about how he's under scrutiny for showcasing Highguard the way that he did, and the fact that Highguard is not that interesting of a game. But it was supposed to be an indie game, all the same. What I've learned here recently from Source GameFile, that Tencent secretly funded the struggling shooter Highguard. Now, if you don't know who Tencent Studio are, they are known for backing a lot of Western games. They are known for backing a lot of games. They're a Chinese gaming giant, and they led some financial backing to Wildlight Entertainment, who is the developers of Highguard, to help launch it. Now, here's the thing. That in of itself is not a big deal. Okay, the the why I'm presenting in this particular why gaming rant is, why was this held, why was this kept under wraps so hard by Tencent and Wildlight Entertainment? And I'm going to get to that. Let's first look at some of our favorites on the channel. I've made no bones about the fact that IGN and Kotaku both are just shills for the industry, the AAA industry that is being overrun by college kids who were indoctrinated into college and then graduated with useless degrees, still somehow found a way to fail upwards and have taken over so much media now that they're not using your money or their money to spread their political ideology. No, they're using studios' money to do that. And the problem is that it's all just crap. But with that said, let's digress a little bit. Let's look at IGN and what IGN had to say a while back about the whole Highguard controversy. They wrote an article, and I will leave links to all the articles and information that I get here just so it can be verified. Just so you Golden Wonders out there know that I'm not just talking out of my rumpus here, that I'm actually looking and researching some of this stuff. That I'm not just Alex Jonesing it, although I could Alex Jones it and then just be proven right 5 years later. So there you have it, I guess. What I'm saying is back when Highguard controversy first became a big deal, IGN comes out with this great little article titled, "When did it become trendy to hate on a new game? As Highguard struggles to win over the internet, video game developers come to its defense." It's downright horrible. So here's IGN flexing a little bit, being like, look, we have all these video game developers who have come to defend Highguard. With the article saying, chief among the criticisms from player... Oh, no, my bad. Wrong spot. Let's look at this right here. Now, developers from the likes of Baldur's Gate 3 studio Larian, as well as Fortnite maker Epic, have hit out at the discourse surrounding Highguard. I absolutely don't understand why they write like this. Have hit out at the... Why not spoken out? Why not say developers from the likes of Baldur's Gate 3 studio Larian, as well as Fortnite maker Epic, have spoken out against the discourse instead of hit out? I mean, this is what I'm talking about. This college indoctrination, they don't... This is what we're dealing with here, folks. Anyways, so the whole point that I'm trying to make by pointing this out in this article is the idea that they are making us aware that Fortnite and Larian Studio, or Epic and Larian, are on the side of Highguard. So they're already trying to flex muscle. It's like them old mob movies, where the little short guy with the big mouth, he comes in talking all the trash, but he's got the big brute with him who does all the punching and breaking of legs and stuff. It's an intimidation factor to the fans, to the consumer, to let us know, look, you should just shut up. If you don't like Highguard, keep your opinions to yourself, because look at who we have backing us right now. IGN right now is the short little mobster who's just got the big mouth, while they're being backed by Larian and Epic, the big bruiser guys. Now, granted, I understand this whole idea that when you're an artist in some kind of art form, you're a painter or a writer or something, when it comes to art, you don't want to necessarily bash another artist. You kind of want people to succeed. It's not until a lot of money gets involved. Money makes people act funny. Money makes people funny. Trademark that. Money makes you act funny. Henceforth why Pepsi and Coke are at each other's throats, because there's billions of dollars at stake for those companies. But I guarantee you, if they were both just mom and pop shops pushing their own sodas or whatever, yeah, they'd still be at each other at odds with one another because there's still money involved, but they would also appreciate each other's crafts. And perhaps once upon a time they did, It's the same thing here with the gaming industry. Of course, Epic and Larian are going to speak out a little bit because they're video game makers too, and they don't want to just trash something. I get it. If I paint a picture and you paint a picture, for instance, why trash each other's paintings? That's just ugly. I get where they're coming from. With Epic, it's a little bit more insidious because of Tencent's involvement here that we've learned about, but we're getting to that. So they make this whole long article just making sure that we all know Epic and Tencent and Epic and Larian are backing Highguard, or making sure that we understand that they don't like the ugliness. Cliff Belzinski of Gears of War fame, Epic executive Mark Rain, and Larian boss Sven Vinicki. You know what? I'm so sorry. I've probably heard these people's names before out loud, and I still don't know how to pronounce them, so sue me. In particular, negativity from critics, or they don't like the negativity from the critics, is what I'm trying to say. Vinicki of Larian actually said this: I don't like people crapping on things others have created. He tweeted that. Putting something out into the world makes you vulnerable, and that alone deserves respect. Even if you dislike the creation, it's easy to destroy things. It's a lot harder to build them. The best critics understand this, even when they're being critical. They do their best not to be hurtful. I get where he's coming from in this article. I really do. Yeah, it is a lot easier. There's an old expression that, we call it a Southernism, where I'm from in the South. You got a lot of Southernisms. And one of them is, it takes only one holy crap to ruin 20 that-a-boys. Meaning you can have 20 successes, but if you have one failure, that's what people are going to tend to focus on. And so I get where he's coming from on this. And that's kind of what IGN is trying to point out here. They're trying to make sure we know that Highguard has all this backing. And that if you like Baldur's Gate 3 and you respect Larian, then you should respect Highguard. This is a fairly long article. It's several paragraphs long, and it's just letting us know you, the consumer, need to shut up. And they wrote this around the time it was done. Well, it's been updated since January 28th, 2026. So yeah, that's when it was written. Kotaku turns around also with its own article talking about Highguard devs talk turning Rust into hero shooter and that terrible game awards reveal. Now, we know that both Kotaku and IGN are nothing but shills. I've said it. I said it just a few minutes ago. They are just being ran by indoctrinated college kids who fail upwards because what they learn in college isn't worth toilet paper on the degree it's written. You wonder, well, why is Kotaku taking to this fight, trying to defend Highguard the way that it is? Well, for one, Kotaku was, and it says right here in this article that Kotaku was one of a number of media outlets and content creators invited to a launch event for Highguard in Los Angeles, California on January 21st. Now we know that Los Angeles, California is like the mecca for these type of people, you know what I mean? Because if we've learned anything from the Epstein files and Pizzagate, and Pizzagate where former President Barack Obama was implicated into, and the Epstein files that has implicated just about everybody else that wasn't mentioned in Pizzagate. we know that Los Angeles is pretty much full of creeps. I mean, it is the derelict of society that has been trying to influence the rest of the world, basically, to follow suit in their debauchery. Well, so we know that Los Angeles, California is the mecca for these people. So the fact that Kotaku was one of the numbered of media outlets and content creators invited to the launch for Highguard in Los Angeles, California, I bet they creamed their jeans. I bet they were so happy. They're like, oh, yes, you know, it doesn't matter what you could have shown them there. I mean, I'm just going to say that, you know, allegedly, it doesn't matter what they were going to go see. They got invited to Los Angeles, California to a high class event that, you know, for an indie developer, that's pretty crazy. You know, that's pretty crazy. They're indie developers. Where's that money coming from, right? Right? And we're getting there. We're getting there. So they go to Los Angeles, California. In this article, Kotaku also mentions, let's see here. Where did I see that at? Because I don't want to read like the whole article. That's not why we're really here. And you could say, well, he's just cherry picking. Well, that's why I'm going to leave the links so you can go through here and read it, the entire thing yourself. I have no problem doing that because I'm just looking for what they said here that will lead to my end point here. What it is I'm actually trying to get at. At one point, the development victory was determined by fully destroying an enemy keep. Eventually, the team settled on detonating. The decision to increase the results during playtest evolving and meta similar reasons. It's around here somewhere. I just have to launch. Was really years struggle went through Highguard. Okay, here it is. So here in the second to the last paragraph here in this Kotaku article, it says the team's passion for the project is infectious, even as the anxiety about the looming launch is plain to see on their faces. McCord tells me about the story behind the axe and how it ended up serving as both a means of gathering resources and a combat tool. Carlos explains how the momentum problem was only really solved in 2025, over 3 years into development. It stands out to me how open the team has been about the struggles they went through developing Highguard, a game they've worked on for years, but whose fate is at the mercy of a fickle and chaotic online audience. I love how they throw in little jabs at us, folks. I do. How they... a fickle and chaotic online audience. Yes, we are fickle, and yes, we are chaotic. We're fickle in the sense where we love Star Wars, and then you let Kathleen Kennedy turn the Force into female, and we suddenly don't like it no more. And why? Not because it's female, there's a lot of female things, but because the Force doesn't have a gender. So you're now alienating the majority of the fans, the types of fans who, I might add, made Star Wars as great as it is. Because whether you like it or not, the male audience is what made Star Wars great. It is, because we're the ones that got into it first. I'm not saying women aren't invited. In fact, back in the day, a lot of us wished there were more female fans. But to alienate us in such a way, that's just crap. And so, yeah, we are fickle. When you start treating us badly, we'll just turn on you. We don't care. So, yeah, we're fickle, and it's not a bad thing. And chaotic? Well, yeah, we sure are chaotic because we're not only just fickle, but we're vocal about it as well. And we'll let you know we think it's crap. It's not a bad thing, folks. It's not a bad thing. And I want all the women out there to know that you're invited into this. You know, we won't alienate you, so don't alienate us. Plain and simple. So there's that. What really strikes me here, though, is it stands out to me how open the team has been about the struggles they went through developing Highguard. Let's go back to GameFile's article about Tencent secretly funding struggling shooter Highguard. What struggles were they facing there? It certainly wasn't the funding. So is it just the fact that they hired incompetence like most industries are right now in gaming, not only in gaming, but in Hollywood in general? Is it just that the fact that they hired incompetence? Because they do say in that same paragraph that the momentum problem was only really solved in 2025. Over 3 years into development, over 3 years? You had that much funding from Tencent, and it took you over 3 years to solve a momentum problem? I mean, seriously? I mean, I can understand some issues. You know, I could even forgive Cyberpunk 2077 for some of its failings. It got hyped up way beyond what it needed to be on just ideas, on just theory of what the game could be. And there was no way they were going to make that launch with all of that got promised. You know, that's what happens between actual game developers and promotional people. You know, I can't even think of what their name, what you would call them right now, but the people who run promotions for games and the people who actually make the games, you had a disconnect there when it comes to Cyberpunk 2077. Nobody was really hyped for Highguard to begin with. 3 years into development and they couldn't figure out a momentum problem? I mean, what are you doing? And you've got Tencent backing you, you know, which makes sense as to why Epic stood up for Highguard. See, it becomes this nefarious thing all of a sudden, right? It becomes this like weird nefarious thing when you don't disclose where your backing actually is coming from. You call yourself an indie developed game, and then you got developers like Epic who own Fortnite, who have made Fortnite what it is, and they've been backed by Tencent, and then they just stand up and defend Highguard. You know, with Larian, I get it, but with Epic, it starts to all come into picture, doesn't it? It all starts to, like, the dots begin to connect and the puzzle pieces begin to fit if you really think about it. So where are we at now? Well, IGN now has come out with their own on February 17th, 2026 of this year. February 17th, 2026, IGN drops an article saying Tencent was quietly backing Highguard Studio, according to report. The studio has been fully funded since 2022. Highguard, the free-to-play PvP raid shooter announced at the Game Award last year and released a preemptive criticism and mockery only for most of its developers to be laid off just weeks after launch, was apparently financially backed by Tencent, according to a report. Apparently now, huh? Apparently. And IGN still can't get over themselves. They still have to say, to preemptive criticism and mockery. Preemptive. We're clutching our pearls now here. I'm going to leave sorry, my headset just shut off on me and it threw me off. I'm going to leave links to these articles so you can just see the snarkinism. You know, if I weren't raised better, I would call out who wrote this article. I would call her out by name, but I'm not going to. I will leave the link for all you Golden Wonders to see for yourself. This is a total of 2, 3, even though that should be a paragraph as well, maybe, but maybe not. Maybe it's just 2 paragraphs. This whole article is 2 paragraphs. This is, they reported on this with only 2 paragraphs, IGN did. When they were trying to strong arm us, you had, the article was at least several paragraphs, more than 2. I'll tell you that right now. I'm not going to count them all, but it was more than 2. Guarantee you. So, but, when it comes out that perhaps the criticism was justified and warranted, they're just kind of, it was preemptive and apparently we're going to push up our glasses here, ladies. And if you wear glasses, I'm not really trying to hurt your feelings. I wear reading glasses. But we're going to push up our glasses here with our index finger, Apparently It was backed. So, and then it says it remains unclear how heavily reliant Wildlight was on Tencent. That is in the last few sentences of this article. It remains unclear how heavily reliant Wildlight was on Tencent. When at the very top of the article, it says the studio has been fully funded since 2022. So is it fully funded, or is it unclear how reliant Wildlight was on Tencent? IGN can't even get their facts straight. It is ridiculous. Kotaku, however, kind of walked it back. I'll give him this. That whole debacle when Charlie Kirk was unjustly murdered, and I'm probably going to get flagged for that, but he was unjustly assassinated. Their whole article on that whole thing was just absolutely filth. Kotaku should be ashamed because they, for the most part, they are filth. However, they did walk it back and say developers at Wildlight Entertainment were very open about Highguard's development, which is a callback to what, the early article by them that I read, talking about, it stands out to me how open the team has been about their struggles. And now they're walking it back a little bit and they're saying developers at Wildlight Entertainment were very open about Highguard's development back when it launched last month. Everything except where the money to make it came from. So, fair enough to them. I mean, they still didn't write a very big article on this either. I mean, to be fair, they really didn't. But at least they're acknowledging, well, perhaps we might have overlooked it. And they're, one of the ones that got invited to Los Angeles. They're one of the ones who got to go and bow at the golden idol, of decadence. And yet they're going to walk it back a little bit. So maybe they're learning a little bit, or who knows, perhaps that there is at least one person in Kotaku who has some form of ethics. At least maybe one of them. I don't know how many people Kotaku have working for them, but let's just say out of 50, what's the odds that at least one of them does? Maybe God doesn't need to smite them like Sodom and Gomorrah because he can't find at least one good person in Kotaku. So there's that. At least this person has some kind of ethics behind them. So why do I bring all this up? Why is this important? Why am I ranting so hard about the fact that Tencent was secretly funding Wildlight for Highguard? And it's really not that big of a deal. I mean, in the long run, it doesn't really matter. They could have been completely open about this whole thing. And what made Jeff Keighley showcase them the way he did at the Gaming Awards? What was this whole thing about? What was this whole thing about? Why does all of this seem so nefarious, so sinister and insidious? Well, it's because of the indie development implication. AAA studios are failing right now. We know Assassin's Creed Shadow sucked. Dragon Age the Veilguard sucked. The Tomb Raider finally had to make Lara Croft look like a woman again just to get anybody's interest in it, because their games for a while have sucked. AAA studios are failing. They are, because they're more worried about their political ideologies, furthering, as the critical drinker likes to call it, the message, their propaganda, their agenda. They're trying to further the Hollywood standard, the golden calf, the idol. They're trying to make us worship the golden bull, the owl in the grove. If you know, you know. They are pushing harder than they ever have, and they're failing. They're failing miserably. The moral majority wants nothing to do with it, and rightfully so, and justly so. And so who's succeeding? The indie studios, the indie developers. I know a lot of these guys. If you watch some of my videos, I've done interviews with a lot of them. A lot of these guys are still passionate about their craft and not some message. So they're the ones succeeding. people are getting more and more into indie games because they're fun to play and they're not just going to sit there and preach at you. So what do we see at the Game Awards? A lot of indie style games that aren't really indie games. They're all style but no substance. They look good. I mean, don't get me wrong. I got nothing against with the way any of them looked per se, but they have no substance to them. You can tell that they're just trying to look indie, but they're not really passionate. They're just by the numbers wonkiness. And it's because the video game company, the industry in general, the AAA studios, the industry that is in league with the rest of them, the rest of the media that is trying to run everything and tell us what to think. And I know I should be wearing a tinfoil hat right now, but just take my word for this because you can see it happening in real time. I am not a young man. I'm not exactly an old man, but I'm not a young man. Okay. To date myself, I was alive when Disney had its renaissance. All right. What I mean by that is I was alive to see The Little Mermaid, The Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, and Aladdin all released in theaters. I saw all 4 of those movies in theaters to give you an idea of my age and the time frame I come from. I never would have thought I'd see the heat death of Disney. Disney's had its struggles in the past, but it's in a heat death right now. It is going supernova and sucking all the IPs it owns in with it. So you can see this happening in real time. So to say that I'm wearing a tinfoil hat, well, maybe I need to wear one, but I'm not necessarily wrong either. And the video game industry knows this. And so what are they trying to do? They're trying to control the narrative. And how are they controlling the narrative? By quote unquote showcasing indie developed games that aren't really indie developed games. If you want indie developed games, go check out indie developed games. Go on to itch.io. Go into Steam and look for free games. You know, watch my channel. Here comes a shameless plug. Watch my channel. I have a playlist, free games that deserve attention. Those are all indie developers. Those are all hardworking guys and gals. Those are all hardworking people who are passionate about what they do, not passionate about preaching to you and making sure you believe the way they believe. Because if you don't believe the way they believe, then we can't be friends and we've got to isolate you now from our product. It's just ridiculous. And that's what's happening. That's why this whole Highguard thing is such a big deal. That's why it is a big deal that Tencent was secretly funding Wildlight Studios. That's why it's a big deal, because it shows you just how nefarious the gaming industry is becoming. How you cannot trust what they're saying. All you can trust is word of mouth. All you can trust is your fellow gamers. If they tell you a game is crap, well, then it's probably crap. You know, we talk about democracy all the time. Well, but this is democracy at its strongest form here, people. It really is, because the majority knows when something sucks. They said Dustborn sucked, and guess what? It sucked. They said that game Forspoken, I think, is what that game was called. I can't even remember. That it sucked. That Star Wars Outlaws sucked. It sucked. And that's why. And that's why, because it's ran by these studios that are failing because they're more worried about ideology, because they're a bunch of college kids who got indoctrinated and decided when they got out, they were going to use everybody else's money, you the consumer as well as money, to spread their ideology. Why? Because they're not interesting enough to become actual modern philosophers. Because they're not Plato, they're not Socrates, they're not Machiavelli, they're not Sun Tzu. They have no substance to what they're saying, like those men of old did. And so they have to steal money to spread their ideology, and their ideology sucks. And so what do? They secretly try to fund these little games and call them indie games when they're not indie games. They're not. They're not. Does that mean that every game that got showcased at the Game Awards sucks? No, some of them looked really good. I mentioned Divinity earlier, but just keep that in mind. That's what makes this whole thing important, is the underhanded tactics that the video game industry is trying to use. That, I miss the Game Awards. I've talked about this on the podcast Stick Drift with my brothers about how I miss the old Game Awards when it was Limp Bizkit and Monster Energy Drink. I mean, granted, the first video game awards dropped the ball. Madden Game of the Year. Are you kidding me? When has that game ever been Game of the Year on anything? When is that game? Anyways, I digress. Point being is that at least it was fun. It's not fun anymore. It's all political. They knew they couldn't give Erika Ishii Best Voice Actress, so what do? They keep blasting that girl's despicable mug all over your screen to remind you, well, she exists. Well, yeah, she exists. Evil exists. We know. Here you go. And so this is what you've got to look out for now in the video game industry. Not every indie game is an indie game. If you want indie games, they're easy to find. Go find them. And then make the decision for yourself. So why? That is the question. Why was this such a big deal? Now you know. Because it is a tactic and a ploy. And that's going to be all for me from Lord Pog at Lord Pog Gaming. I want to thank you for just sitting there listening to me rant and rave. I don't know how crazy this video is going to come across, but I mean, I just wanted to try this out. I wanted to go a little bit more off the cuff, and I hope I didn't ramble on for too long. Thank you all for joining me. You guys mean the world to me. I want y'all to know that. You golden wonders out there, y'all mean the world to me. So I don't know how to explain it. I'm not very good at this. I'm not very good at like the emotional bits, but I want y'all to know that you mean a lot to me. And from my very heart and soul, I love y'all. Y'all come back now. Stay golden.